Hello, welcome to my podcast. Today I have a comedian with us. You are the first, Frank.
Yeah.
As you may imagine, because my podcast, just by the name, you may imagine that I never thought about inviting a comedian to my podcast, but here you are,
Here
and
I
for
am.
very good reason. His name, my guest today is Frank King. He's a comedian, as I said before. He's well known as the mental health comedian, is that it?
That is correct.
And he wrote for more than 20 years for The Tonight Show.
Correct.
So, why would I invite a comedian to my show? Well, I will answer. I know you don't know, but I do. He has a long experience and family experience with suicide and mental health issues. And it took him a long time to realize that this was intergenerational
Hmm.
and also find ways to cope with it and to deal with it and to acknowledge what he had. So I think you have so much. I know he does TED Talks and he has come to some, not conclusions, but some awareness of what was going on with him that I think is very valuable to share with my audience. So, welcome to my show. Thank you for being here with us, Frank.
I'm
And,
delighted to be here.
and if you're watching the video, because this is also in my YouTube channel, you see that he's in his car.
That's my virtual automobile. It's not really. Oh, and the last one I did this morning, I had my
No.
German Shepherd back here going to the vet, and somebody goes, "Is that a dog?" Oh no, it's a virtual dog. It's
No. Do you know that you can actually add that on Google? I did that the other time. It's really
you had
cool.
it.
You add animals now to your
Really?
environment. Yeah, and it looks so real when you Google let's say dog, and it gives
Yeah.
you the option of 3D, and you click on it and you position wherever you want in your room, and it looks real. Me and my sister spent like hours doing this. I started with a huge bear in my living room.
Yeah.
So
And
it's a fun thing to work with.
yes, and your guest is going,
Ah,
"A
I know.
bear, a
Be
bear behind
careful.
you."
Be careful. So, Frank, thank you for sharing your experience. And I would
Sure.
like to first ask you about your family history. Can you just tell us a little bit about your history with depression and with suicide ideation?
Yes, it's called, as you said, generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by
Yeah.
suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days.
Mm.
And if you, I'll spare the details, but my first TEDx talk is called "A Matter of Laugh," Laugh, or death, and the story of finding my great aunt is in there. And about 10 years ago, this week, after filing Chapter 7 bankruptcy, losing everything we'd worked for 25 years, I learned what
Mm.
the barrel of my gun tastes like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger, which I hope is
Mhm.
obvious. A
Mhm.
friend of mine actually came up after one of my keynotes. He'd never heard me say that. And he said, and I quote, "Hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I said, "Hey, man, could you try to sound a little less disappointed? I'm still here." So, and I have two mental illnesses: major depressive disorder, relatively common, and then something a little more rare, I guess, chronic suicidal ideation or chronic suicidality,
Mhm.
which is, although it's rare, I must tell you, every keynote I've ever given, at least one person, sometimes more, have that condition. Did not know it had a name. They thought they were just some kind of freak. And
Mhm.
when they find out, well, a young woman came up after a college presentation, said, "Thank you for your keynote." I said, "You're welcome." She said, "But it made me weep." I said, "How did it make you weep?" She goes, "Well, I tell a story about how suicide is always a solution for people like me and people in my tribe for any problem, large or small." And I tell a story about my
Mhm.
car this car breaking down. And I had three thoughts, unbidden: get it fixed, buy a new one, or I could just kill myself. And she said, when you said that out loud, buy a new one, get it fixed, or you could just kill yourself, she goes, "I've been having those thoughts all my life. I didn't know it had a name. I thought I was some kind of freak. And when I heard you say that out loud, I realized for the first time in my life that I was not alone, and I wept." So that's,
So acknowledging, yeah.
yeah, and
Great.
letting people know that they're not alone. They're not freaks. It's a thing. It has a name. The relief
Mm-hmm.
for her was palpable to know. And I'm hoping that maybe I steered her just far enough off the path to suicide that she'll lead a
Mm-hmm.
normal life. And
Sure,
this happens
sure.
over and over and over again.
Yes, I'm sure it does because it is such a taboo. So many
Mm,
people suffer in pain, but when they hear someone say, "Here's, I hear you," and we're in the same, as you said, same tribe, right?
yes.
I'm
And she
sure
said,
it brings.
relief. She said to me, I was hoping I would grow out of it. And I said, I'm 63 years old. If I'm going to grow out of this, I better get started.
Hmm. Yeah. So, talking about secrets and not talking about something,
Mm.
how was that dealt? Mental health issues, suicide, how was it dealt in your family? Did people
Uh,
talk about it?
it wasn't in my mother's generation. My mother and her generation decided that, because I was only 4 years old when I witnessed my great aunt's suicide, they decided they would create a myth, a family myth, that when she took her life, she was very much serene, had her hands folded in prayer. It was not
Hmm.
the horrible scene that it actually was. And so they did not acknowledge it. It was, nobody talked about it until my cousin, in 2012, I mentioned this myth to him. I didn't know it was a myth. And he's 10 years older. And so he was there in the family when it happened, and he knew that they had been lying to me for decades. And he told me the real story. And then all of a sudden, whatever had been holding that back in my brain, um, where I
The
had it
memory came
compartmentalized,
back?
boom, all at once. And it was a pretty horrific scene. And that was one of the things that encouraged me to speak out about it. And then I wanted to use my comedy and speaking. I always wanted to speak and not just be funny, but to make a difference. And I could
Hmm.
never figure out what I had to teach anybody. And then after I realized my family history, my personal history, and the fact that nobody talks about depression or suicide out loud unless you bring it up, and then everybody has a story.
Then
I
let's
thought,
bring it up, right?
let's bring it up. But my challenge was to rebrand from funny speaker, comedian, to speaker who was funny. So that's when I did my first TEDx talk to let the event planners, meeting planners, speakers bureaus realize that I could be serious.
Hmm.
And
Sure.
I've done four since then. Same idea. Let them know that yes, it's there's humor, but there's learning objectives, takeaways, action
Hmm.
items.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. When did you realize, Frank? Let's talk about your depression first. When
mhm.
did you when you go back in your memory? When was the first time that you realized that there was something that needed attention?
Well, I was in college, and my high school sweetheart went to a school all the way across the country. So I did not realize that it was depression. I just thought I was lonely and heartsick, but I believe looking back that I was depressed. And then I made the mistake of marrying my high school sweetheart. Although a wonderful woman, we did not belong together, and she wanted me to sell insurance as her dad did. So I got into the insurance business. Great business, but I was miserable. And I realized a couple of years into the marriage and the insurance business that I was depressed and I was suicidal because I really believed since the fourth grade that I wanted to be a comedian. And my wife did not like the idea, so I was not going to the comedy club to do with the open mic nights. And I realized if I did not change something and quickly, I was going to kill myself. And my second
Mm.
thought was, well, I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try comedy. If it works, great. If it doesn't, I can still kill myself. So that's how I got into comedy. It really wasn't a choice. It was either stay put and die or roll the dice,
Mm-hmm.
do what I thought I was supposed to be doing, and fortunately it worked out. And so that's why my fourth TEDx talk is called "Suicide: The Secret of My Success." Dead man talking, because it's a story of how I realized that I was going to kill myself if I didn't do something, and so I jumped ship, tried comedy, and thank goodness it worked.
So it pushed you through change, and it was a positive change then.
Yes, because I really did believe I did. Told my first joke in the fourth grade. I did the senior talent show in high school. I won doing comedy. I've always been very funny. My entire
So
family's funny.
humor was always there.
Yes, and the family as well. My sister's very funny. My mother was very funny, and so I inherited that along with the mental illness from my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, everybody in my family except for one cousin has one mental illness or another.
Really?
Everybody's yeah, and the difference now is my generation, my sister, my cousins, myself, we're all very open about it. You know, everybody, there's no taboo in the family. And for my nieces and nephews, same thing, because it's just known in the family that we live with these conditions. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody's out about their mental health, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Your first time having ideation was when you were married. Was that the first time that
Yes,
suicide came to mind? Okay.
I was driving down Highway 163 in San Diego late in the afternoon, which is my lowest time of day mentally.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of overcast, and I was married miserable, insurance miserable, and it just flashed across my brain. Well, why don't you just kill yourself? And I was like, where did that come from? And
Hmm.
that was certainly not the last time that thought crossed my brain. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was the first time. It was my first. That's the first time I remember that as an option that came out of nowhere.
Okay. Okay. Has it, do you find that now that you openly talk about it and you just said that your generation in your family does talk about it, but do you find that what you do now has changed or has changed the way your relationships are or your friends are more open about it or does it have an impact, direct impact on your family, for example?
My family, yes, since we're all out about it, and the nieces and nephews have no problem saying, "Mom, Dad, Frank, I'm depressed," and you know, and then when I came out at age 56 in that first TEDx talk, nobody in my family knew that I was depressed and suicidal.
Really?
I had been, people with mental illness, very good actors. I have a Screen Actors Guild card for a reason. I'd just been acting normal for 56 years, and so I used the opportunity on stage to come out and say I live with these mental illnesses, and it was a great relief. It
Mm.
also allowed my wife to understand why occasionally I was moody. That it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
her fault or something she did. It also allowed me to surround myself with friends who sort of my pit crew, if you were racing, that are there when you pull into the pit and you need something.
Mm-hmm.
They don't judge. They understand what I'm going through. They just ask. I said to my workout partner, he said to me one day, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm wretchedly depressed." He said, "What does that look like?" And I told him what it looked like,
Wow, that's a
and
great question. Yeah.
yeah, I said, well, I said to him, when you were 18 years old and you were a young man and every other thought was about a young woman, and he said, I
Mm-hmm.
remember that. I go, then he says, well, what's your every other thought about now? I said, going back to bed, pulling the covers over my head and binge watching Netflix.
Mm,
And we both laughed about it. I think you should have people in your life that you can be that brutally honest with.
sure.
When they say, how
Yeah.
are you doing? You can actually tell them.
But you also model for people, don't you, when you do that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
He
You
has
mm,
Parkinson's and is very open about it. And we actually joke. He's able to joke with me about his Parkinson's. He's got a little bit of a tremor. And so
mm-hmm.
he's not offended if, I said, if we gave you
Yeah.
a gun and we're holding up a place and you're going like this, I think the guy's going to be really nervous. Uh, so because he's out with me about his chronic illness and
Of
I'm out with
course,
him,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You were telling the story of you told your friend I'm depressed and said, what does that look like? It reminded me actually two stories that you told that reminded me of Andrew Solomon. I'm sure you've read his book on depression, The Midday Demon.
I believe so.
Andrew Solomon, and it's one of the best books on depression I've read. And I interviewed him for my book, and he tells a story that he did the same. And he was a good friend of his. He met this good friend, and for a long time they'd been friends. And he asked the same question: "So how are you doing?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm really depressed." And I think it was right after the death of his mother. And so my mother died, and he just started saying, how depressed he was. And his friend just looked at him and said, "Well, it's so good to hear from you," and just left.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's, and you know
That's
what
the
he says? He says, in that moment, he became my ex-friend.
yes. Yeah, well,
And some
because
people, and
people,
that's the thing with mental illness and also with suicide. we don't know what to say, right? And many times that's where the stigma comes from, and it also feeds the stigma.
Yes, you don't know what to say, afraid you'll say the wrong thing. Every now and then I like to be honest with somebody who is neurotypical. I was in Sacramento, long day, 2 3 hour workshops I held. Got in the Uber with a nice young man, and our eyes locked in the rearview mirror. And he said, "How are you doing?" And I thought, okay, here we go. I said, "I'm depressed and suicidal. How about you?" And he blinked, and he said, "What am I supposed to say to that?" I said, "Do you really want to know?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You're supposed to ask me if I have a plan." So he goes, "Do you have a plan?" And he paused, and then he goes, "Does it involve Uber?" Brilliant.
And then it made you laugh.
Yes, I laughed. He laughed. I'm sure it'll give him a story to tell back at Uber headquarters. Oh, I got
I
this
know,
guy got
I'm
in my
sure.
car with the suicide.
Can you imagine how scared he was?
Yes, he thought maybe I was going to take him with me. Um,
Oh my
but
God.
over time, it usually happens when I'm tired. I'm tired of putting on,
Mm,
as they say, putting
yeah.
on my game face. And
Mm-hmm.
I just thought, I'm going to level with him. I'm depressed and suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
Yeah.
And by the way, that's my goal in life, is to make talking about depression, thoughts of suicide as casual as that, as casual as talking
Yeah.
about the weather
Mm-hmm.
or sports,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
that people don't get freaked out
And
by
it's also
the
your language, Frank, right? It's how you
yes.
express yourself. So that's one. The other thing that you mentioned is, or that it helped my wife understand why I'm so moody sometimes, and it's
Hmm.
not her fault. Again, Andrew Solomon tells a story, and it has to do with what you said in the beginning, that after you talk, there's always someone who comes to you after
Yes.
the presentation and, oh, I heard you and I have the same. And he tells the story of a woman who came to him after a presentation. Said, I'm so glad you talked about this. I've had depression for like 20 years and it's really hard. I take medication. My husband doesn't know. I never told him. And it's so hard sometimes to just pretend something that you're not feeling. And she went on and on and on. And then he said that after her, other people came and talked, and then this guy comes to him and said, same thing. So glad I came. I may open up to my wife because she doesn't know. I've had it for many years. I take medication. And guess who they were? That was the
Husband and
husband
wife.
of the husband and wife.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine? And he said, well, you guys really have communication problems.
Yes, I
It's
actually
but that's how hard it is for people to open up, right?
I did a podcast. It was a mother and daughter. It's a mental health podcast, and
Mm-hmm.
the mother had a very difficult childhood, and then of
Mm-hmm.
course sometimes genetically you can pass on that stress and strain to your offspring. And so her daughter had a difficult childhood, and we're talking about chronic suicidal ideation. And her mother teared up a bit, and she turned to her mother and she said, "You're crying." And her mother said to her, for the first time ever, "What Frank is talking about, the chronic suicidal ideation," she goes, "I have that as well." Now her mom is in her 70s
Wow.
and had never told her adult daughter until that moment. So the daughter says, "After we get done with this podcast, we need to have a cup of coffee and talk," because
Yeah,
she never
yeah,
told anybody
sure.
until she heard me say it out loud.
And
So
it's understandable. It's a
yeah,
scary thing to say, for you to say and for anyone to hear, right?
especially if you don't think it has a name, if you think it's just you and the way your brain works, because
Mm-hmm.
it's freaky, to think, why do I
Mm-hmm.
keep thinking about suicide?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
so used to it after all this time that it's a really a non-issue. I mean, it just flashes across my mind. I think, yeah, there's a good idea, and,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I will tell you this: it keeps me alive. The chronic suicidal ideation, because I believe suicide is mostly about pain, ending the pain,
of course,
and
yeah.
because I know I can do it any time. Because the metaphor would be sitting in the exit row on an airplane next to the window. I know that I can pull open the door and go anytime. It allows me, knowing that I can end the pain that way, to endure a great deal of pain going forward because I know I have an out. That if it gets too bad, then it's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
strange superpower, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that being a man, because in our society, men don't talk about emotions, right? Yeah. Do you find that
Yes.
it maybe took you longer than it would, or maybe it has even more impact because you're a man?
I think both. I and two women, Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas,
Yes, I've
who is on,
interviewed her. She's been
yes,
on my podcast. Yeah, she's great.
she and I and the therapist named Sarah Gare have created a 4-book series. The second book comes out on the 16th on men's mental health. And the second volume has a great deal to do with male toxicity or masculine toxicity, where, big boys don't cry. They were
Mm.
trained from birth, a lot of us. And it's not just mental things. I've had a number of friends who passed away from prostate cancer and colon cancer simply because as men, they put off getting a PSA test, or they refuse to have a colonoscopy because it's just not manly. And
Wow.
then these are diseases that if you catch them early are imminently curable. But because of this male toxicity or, masculine toxicity, they just don't, they don't take care of themselves physically or mentally. I mean, if they're not going to reach out and get a PSA test, they're sure not going to go, I think I may need a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
But the book is
Yeah.
all about, getting beyond that and surrounding yourself with men who understand that. And it's okay to
Mm-hmm.
express your feelings. And it's an anthology like Chicken Soup for the Soul. 12 stories,
Mm-hmm.
12 guys, each one has an issue. And then this is how I'm coping, and hope that men would see how another man is coping and go, oh, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's I'm delighted to be involved in the project.
Mm-hmm. What have you learned? Just to end, I have two more questions. One is, what have you learned with this experience of speaking about suicide and reaching out to people and opening this door for people to realize what they have and maybe do the same and reach out for someone? And the other one is, what helps you?
Okay. Well, speaking is very therapeutic for me. Talking about it, and then that line of people after I do a general Q&A, and I tell the audience, look, if you have a question you don't want to ask in front of everybody, I'll just stick around and I'll answer individual questions until we're done. And sometimes there are 8 people lined up, and I find that very therapeutic. And the because I've revealed to so many people that what they have has a name and maybe steered them off the path to suicide. I realized one night that I'm sort of like that character George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, in that he was shown what the world would be like without him, and I've been shown by these people what the world would be like, or they would be like, if I weren't there to speak and say you're not alone and steer them
Wow.
off the path. So it's just it's my
Gives you
why. It's why.
purpose. It's purpose,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, and so that helps me, and I have of course a self-care plan, diet, exercise, meditation, medication, and I have other techniques, gamification, things that I use to get me out of the bed or get me to the gym. So I've surrounded myself with my pit crew. The books on men's mental health are all wrapped around automobile metaphors.
Hmm.
So the pit
Oh,
crew,
that's a
don't
good idea. Book for
we,
men.
yeah, we figured they'd pick it up. My favorite one that I wrote was this: don't you wish the man in your life had a check engine light? It goes off. He goes to the mental mechanic, goes up on the rack, and the mental mechanic goes, Bob, no wonder you're depressed. You're 2 quarts low on serotonin. Uh, Very male centric, but
Yeah,
that's,
yeah.
it
But
looks
that's
like
the
an automobile.
language. Yeah, yeah. It's a language
And
they
it
understand.
looks like an owner's manual for an automobile. It's got a guy on the front with his head popped off and a guy looking in with a screwdriver, and
Cool.
on purpose, on purpose. Yeah, Sally called me, Sally Spencer Thomas. And she said, Frank, well, Sarah and I are writing this book on men's mental health. And would you make it funny? Would you add the metaphors? And I said, hold on just one second. You two ladies are writing a book on men's mental health. Don't you think you might need, oh, I don't know, a man?
A
A
man.
man!
I'm glad she said yes.
Yes. Well, and Sally and Sarah are both in my pit crew. I could call them day or night and just say, look,
Yeah.
I'm in trouble.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I've got a friend in Philadelphia who I know for a fact. If I called him and said, look, I'm on the ragged edge, I'm out on the ledge. Even in COVID, he would pay whatever it costs to get on a plane and fly to where I am
Mm.
to help me.
Wow.
And I think that's important that you have people in your life like that who you know,
We'll be there.
will be there for you
Yeah.
and I would do the same for him. So
Yeah, you just brought me a great memory. I actually got emotional now because when I had the depression, a good friend of mine came to. I lived in São Paulo at the
Hmm.
time, and she came from the Northeast to see me. And we went out to dinner, me, her, and a friend. And I went to the bathroom, and this friend told me later that she talked to him. She gave, because they didn't know each other, she gave him her telephone number, and she said, if you find that she's not doing well, just give me a call and I'll get on a plane.
Mm,
Yeah.
yes, I think you need
Yeah.
people like that, and in your life, and for no other reason than if I called this gentleman up and I said I'm struggling, and he said I'm on a plane. What he does at that moment is he plants a seed of hope that because he's getting on a plane and coming out, that there may be a way out of this.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense, and
Yeah.
that's what I try to do with everybody else is plant that seed of hope. You know that this you know it's with treatment and time it will get better. I'll help you get the treatment you
Mm-hmm.
need. Take the time. So yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
that little seed of hope is what keeps oftentimes keeps you alive.
Frank, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
My pleasure.
getting into your car to talk to us.
Yes, and thank you for letting me be your first comedian on the
Oh
podcast.
yeah, it's been great. I love it. We need more. We need more laughs on my podcast.
Yes, that's well, that's why people ask me, does being a comedian keep you from getting booked to speak on suicide? I said, no, you got it backwards. They want the information, the learning objectives. They want lived
Mm-hmm.
experience, and they value the fact that I can weave my personal stories that are amusing,
Mm-hmm.
tasteful and amusing, in to give people relief as we go through the very difficult subject. So,
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Keep yourself safe. Go
thank
back
you.
home.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Right.
Have a good
Thanks very
day.
much. You too.